Hello. Okay, we are going to debrief a negotiation. Let me just put this. Okay, so this is a negotiation debrief. If you have not yet negotiated the role play involving the singer and the opera house hiring her to sing, please do so before you watch this taped lecture. It's very important that you conduct the negotiation first. If you watch this lecture, it'll completely ruin the negotiation. So again, if you have not negotiated the singer and the opera house yet, please turn this off and watch it later so that you can watch it after you negotiate, and this will help debrief what you learned during the negotiation. Okay, with that, let's move forward. So there were confidential facts. When you go into a negotiation, there's going to be information that both of you know, and that's the main background information that you both have. And then usually each side is given confidential facts. These are secret facts that are not known to the other side. So let me share with you the confidential facts from both sides, first from the opera house and then from the singer. So here are the confidential facts that the opera house had. The opera house already hired a soprano for the role, right? But she has developed a benign throat tumor requiring immediate surgery. Every other soprano contacted by the opera house has been unavailable. The opera house is desperate. Even though the singer is old for the part, her voice is strong, and with proper makeup, she could be outstanding in the role. Due to time pressures, management has authorized you to pay the singer $15,000 more than the $30,000, which was to be paid to the sixth soprano originally scheduled for the role. In other words, you can pay the singer up to $45,000. The show must go on, and not to get singer would result in the show's cancellation and a $400,000 loss to the opera house. Okay, so let's see what's going on with the singer. For the past 2 years, despite countless auditions, you have failed to land any singing roles. You feel desperate for this job. You can get this role. If you get this role, you're almost guaranteed to get an important part in a forthcoming television special on operas, a gig that will pay you $45,000 and lead to many other singing engagements. Because this job is clearly your ticket back into the singing game, you would gladly sing the role for free if that's what it takes. So some of you are probably saying, "Wow, that's what was going on the other side." So let's look for a moment at lessons learned. And the lessons that you learn in this negotiation can be applied to many other negotiations, right? What you first want to do in a negotiation, you have the information that's available to both of you. It might be through the internet, it might be through conversations with people, background research, whatever. What you're trying to do in the negotiation is to get what is on the other side's sheet, right? You're basically trying to have a conversation to get that secret information. That is oftentimes what a negotiation is about. Every negotiation has what is called a bargaining range. And in the literature, it's called a ZOPA, or a zone of possible agreement. And in this negotiation, the singer is willing to sing for free. So on the left-hand side is zero, the singer is singing for free. On the right-hand side, the opera house is willing to pay up to $45,000. So that's the opera house's bottom line. As you can see, the zone of possible agreement is made up of the bottom lines, really, of both parties. So zero, the negotiation is going to come in somewhere between zero and $45,000. So when you walk into a negotiation, part of what you should be thinking about before you start negotiating is, what do you think this bargaining range is? You know your own bottom line. You know either, I'm willing to sing for free, or I'm willing to pay up to $45,000. You don't know necessarily what's going on the other side. You don't know their bottom line. But part of what you're trying to do is predict, what does that zone of possible agreement look like? And this is a very wide bargaining range, a very wide ZOPA. Sometimes negotiations have very narrow ZOPAs. Sometimes there's no bargaining range at all, right? If I'm selling my home and I'm not willing to take anything less than $300,000, and you're buying a home and you're not willing to pay anything more than $250,000, there's no overlap there. There's no bargaining range whatsoever. So sometimes, again, it's a large bargaining range. Sometimes it's narrow. Sometimes there's no bargaining range at all. The BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is a concept that was developed in Roger Fisher's famous book called Getting to Yes. And here's the thing about the BATNA. I think there are many descriptions of the BATNA that are rather complex, but at its core, this is all it is. If I walk into a negotiation with you, let's say that I'm the opera house and I'm walking in to negotiate with or let's say I'm the singer, right? I'm the singer, I'm walking in to negotiate with the opera house. I list, before I come to an agreement, I list out all of my alternatives. So if I don't make a deal with the opera house, my alternatives are I could give up singing, or I could move to Europe and try to get a job there, or I literally list all of my options, and I circle the best one, my best alternative to making a deal with the opera house. And before I shake hands with the opera house and make an agreement, I look to make sure that it's at least as good as my best alternative. Because believe it or not, if people don't think about listing all of their alternatives, circling the best one, and comparing it with the deal they're about to make, some people will actually make a deal that is not as good as their best alternative. So this is a very powerful tool. And it's also a central source of power. CNN ran a really wonderful special on James Brown when James Brown passed away. There was one point when James Brown was not paying his band. And so his band thought that it had all the power and leverage and said, we have a concert tonight. We're not going to play with you in the concert. James Brown ended up hiring an airplane to go pick up a bunch of kids in the Midwest who knew his music, and they were musicians, brought them out by airplane to the West Coast where they were having the concert, and he played the concert that night without his band. He played with these kids that he hired, and they interviewed people who attended that concert who said it was one of the best concerts they ever attended. So the band thought that they had all the leverage. How on earth can James Brown perform without us? But in fact, he did have alternatives. So if you have strong alternatives, that's your source of power. If you walk into a job interview and you already have multiple job offers for high salaries, you have a tremendous amount of power and leverage in that interview because you have many powerful alternatives. So again, think about when you walk into a negotiation, what are all of your alternatives? Circle your best one. Make sure that the deal you're about to make is at least as good as your best alternative, and hopefully it's better than your best alternative. Creating value versus claiming value. This is the name of the game in a negotiation. You're either creating value or you're claiming value. Now, in the negotiation, you'll make trades, hopefully, to sort of expand the pie. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, that you're essentially creating value, but at some point you've got to cut the pie up. In other words, you've got to claim value. Now, the reason that many of you who were playing the singer probably did not decide to bring up the television deal is because of this. You probably instinctively knew, I'm not going to bring up the television deal. And probably the reason you didn't do that is because once you start talking about a $45,000 television deal, that essentially creates value, right? So there's $45,000 put on the table. If I'm the opera house, if I can figure out that somehow you're getting that $45,000 is only going to happen if I hire you, I'll probably say, look, sure, we'll hire you for the role, but can we have some of that $45,000? That's claiming the value. So keep in mind that almost anything that you say in a negotiation, like if you were to bring up the $45,000 television deal, almost anything you say could basically create value in the negotiation. And then the game is going to become who's going to claim that value. That's what negotiation is about. Low cost / high value trades. The idea here, and this is essentially how you create value, right? Many people think that they come to an agreement that just involves money. We think so much about deals involving a price, a set dollar value. There are so many other things you can bring to the deal. In this deal, Sally Soprano wants to get back into the game of singing. So if you provide the singer with other opportunities, a limo, a dressing room, press conference, opening night gala events, CDs, DVDs, book deals, etc. All of those things are telling her, I'm back into the singing game. How much do those things cost the opera house to deliver to the singer? Hardly anything. But if you give the singer all of those things, she might say, sure, I'll sing for, you don't have to pay me anything as long as you give me these other things, because all of these other things are indicators that I'm back in the singing game. And that's my goal in this negotiation. So the question you always want to ask is, what can I provide to the other side that they value highly that costs me very little? That's how you create value. What can I give to the other side that they value highly that costs me very little? Of course, you might not necessarily want to indicate to them that it costs you very little, because they might take advantage of that. But that is how value is created. For example, if your job were to be raising money in an organization, a brainstorming session that you might want to have is asking this question: what costs us very little to give to our donors and funders that is valuable to them? Right? They've got bags of cash that they're willing to give to you. They're donors, right? But what are you giving to them that's valuable to them? You might not even know what's valuable to them, but you might be able to provide things for them that cost you very little. Maybe it's a big award dinner. I mean, there are different things that you might be able to provide that might not cost very much money at all, but that might be very valuable to them. And that's the brainstorming session you always want to have. What costs us very little, it's very valuable to the other side. First offer is critical in a negotiation. Should you make the first offer? It's sometimes said to anchor the offer. Oftentimes the first offer, once that's thrown out, the negotiation ends up at that first offer. I told this story before in some of these videotapes, so you might have heard it, but it's worth repeating. So the story is Thomas Edison, the great inventor in the early 1920s, invented something that would be very valuable on Wall Street. And he wanted to get $5,000 for this invention. He walked in to negotiate with the CEO of a company, and the CEO said, Edison, I love your invention. I'll give you $40,000 for it. And Edison said, that sounds fair. I'll take it. So he walked away with $40,000. Now, if you replay that scenario and Edison were to walk in and say, hello, Mr. CEO, I'm hoping to get $5,000 for my new invention here. The CEO would probably say, you know what, Edison, that sounds fair. We'll give you $5,000 for it. So the lesson there is, if you don't know what your bargaining range is, you have to be very careful of throwing out that first offer, because if it's a very wide bargaining range, the first number that's thrown out might be where the negotiation ends. And keep in mind that negotiations, most people look at negotiations as a dance. So the first number that they throw out is usually not their bottom line. It's not the farthest distance they can go. So be mindful that oftentimes a negotiation is, I'm going to start at this extreme, you're going to start at this extreme, and we're going to dance until we get somewhere into the middle. And a lot of people look at negotiations like that. So keep in mind that that first offer is not necessarily the farthest distance that party can go. But what if their first offer is horrendous? Because I'm sort of suggesting, hey, let the other side make the first offer, because you don't know what that bargaining range looks like. And your response should be, what if they make a horrendous first offer? Everybody knows what a flinch is. A flinch is where you go, or indicate to the other side that it's just, you don't like their first offer, it's unfair, it's unreasonable, whatever. Because a flinch essentially erases that first offer. It erases that anchor. And it's basically, you're trying to indicate to the other side through your flinch that they're not being fair. It's dealing with expectations, right? The best flinch that I ever heard was a woman who said, I think I'm going to be sick, right? So she's indicating by saying that, that's a pretty hard flinch. It doesn't have to be that dramatic though. You could say something like, look, we're looking at this differently. That's a flinch. That's letting them know that that anchoring first offer is not going to work for you. And of course, there's the Donald Trump walkout. His flinch is to stand up and walk out of the room. I've heard people standing up, walking out, slamming the door, and accidentally walking into a closet. So you have to be careful doing the Donald Trump walkout. But that's, and I've actually talked about that for many years, not just since the time Trump became president. The idea of saying, where did you get that number, is very powerful. Oftentimes when people throw out a number, the other side just sort of accepts it. But if you say, hey, where did you get that number? You're making them try to justify it with objective criteria or objective standards. Objective criteria are outside, third-party, independent sources of information that lend credibility to the number being thrown out. For example, when you're selling a used car, you go to the Blue Book value. The Blue Book value of the car is the objective standard. So I'm selling my car, I want top dollar. You're buying my car, you want to pay as little as possible. Let's go to the Blue Book value. They don't have a dog in this fight, and they're going to give us a number that is objective, right? It's from an outside, independent, third-party source of information that lends credibility to the numbers that you and I are throwing around in this negotiation for the used car. I have down there Cal Ripken Jr. He played third base for the Baltimore Orioles. He had somebody negotiating on his behalf for his salary. Major League Baseball said, look, the highest paid third baseman in Major League Baseball right now is making $1 million a year. Now, if you hadn't thought about it, you would probably have to respond by saying, okay, that's pretty good objective criteria. And that's what the highest paid third baseman in baseball is making. So yes, pay me $1 million as well. The person who heard that, who was negotiating on behalf of Cal Ripken, said, okay, Major League Baseball, that's interesting. But the fact is that Cal Ripken is one of the best players in Major League Baseball overall. And the best player in Major League Baseball is making $8 million a year. So you should be paying Cal $8 million a year. So by doing that preparation work and coming up with a good objective criteria, that person, by making that one statement, made the bargaining range between 1 million and 8 million. Just by coming up with good objective criteria, the new bargaining range is now between 1 million, which the Major League Baseball offered, and then 8 million, which he said Cal Ripken should be paid. So that now is going to be the negotiation, and it's going to come. It's the final resolution is going to come somewhere between $1 and $8 million. Following are two slides, a friend of mine who gave a negotiation presentation at a law firm, this is what he said about first offers. Consider making the first offer. Making the first offer may give you the upper hand because it establishes expectations and defines the playing field. I would agree with that. And then he said, seriously, make the first offer. People are often told that they should never make the first offer in negotiations. This is a reaction to fear that their first offer may be too high or too low. However, making the first offer establishes your expectations from a position of confidence and strength, as opposed to a reaction to the other side's initial offer. So there you have it. I suggest that you go ahead and let the other side make the first offer. My friend, who's a very successful attorney on the West Coast, says, no, you should make the first offer. So you can experiment with that and do what works best for you. Objective criteria in this negotiation. Think about this negotiation, the facts that you had. What was the objective criteria? What was the objective criteria in the Singer Opera House negotiation? Hopefully you said $25,000, because $25,000 was the amount that the singer was paid last year. Both parties knew that. That's pretty good outside, independent, third-party source of information. Now, part of the reason you probably didn't end up at that number is because your bottom line was, I can sing for free, or I can pay up to $45,000. So next time you do a negotiation like this, keep in mind that objective criteria, because now, if you don't settle at $25,000, this is what should be going through your mind during the negotiation. If somebody said, look, I'm Sally and I want to be paid $35,000, you should say, $35,000? How can I justify paying you $35,000 when last year the person was paid $25,000? Now they might come up with a good reason and get you to go up from 25 to pay you a little bit more, but they shouldn't be able to go up too much higher than 25. On the other hand, if somebody, if the opera house says, look, we want to pay you $15,000, you should be saying, $15,000? How can I justify you paying me only $15,000 when last year you paid the singer $25,000? Seems like you should pay me at least $25,000 if you paid the singer last year $25,000. So that's the thing. Focus on the objective criteria. If you're heavily focused on the fact that you'll sing for free, then $15,000 looks good to you. Or if you're heavily focused on the fact that you can pay up to $45,000, you don't mind paying $35,000. All I'm saying is that objective criteria can be tremendous in justifying the number that is finally settled on. So it's helpful for us to think more about objective standards and objective criteria and where you find them. The market value is objective standard. Experts and authority look in books and encyclopedias, peer-reviewed journal articles, legal precedent. This is how you justify, look, it should be done this way because this is how it's been done in other, this is how the case was resolved in other similar legal cases before this, legal precedent. Laws, rules, regulations, policies, including those of other jurisdictions and countries, right? Let's do it this way because this is how they do it in these 5 other countries. Independent expert testimony, cost plus profit. This is what you'll always charge, the basic cost plus a reasonable profit. That can be sort of an objective criteria, professional or industry standard. And finally, history. It's always been done this way. So that's all the time we have today. Thanks very much, and I will see you soon.